The blizzard howled through the ruined valley, its icy breath weaving between the skeletal remains of shattered war machines. Frost clung to twisted metal and shattered stone, a graveyard of forgotten battles long past. Beneath a crumbling archway, half buried in the snowdrifts, a lone figure lay still, almost lifeless. Varric, last of the Dragonborn of Sulthur, had given up. His massive frame, once a towering presence of scaled strength and regal bearing, was now a gaunt shadow of what he had once been. His thick, sapphire scales were cracked, revealing the dark flesh beneath. His talons, once sharp enough to carve through steel, lay dulled and trembling. His breath came in ragged gasps, forming weak plumes of mist in the frigid air. The battle had been lost. His people had been slaughtered. And now, he was dying, alone, forgotten, and unworthy of the warriors who had fought before him. For days, he had been trapped here, the wound in his side leaking warmth into the snow. His once mighty wings were tattered and useless, one pinned beneath the wreckage of a fallen war mech. The bitter cold gnawed at him, but even that agony was fading, his body succumbing to the creeping embrace of death. His thoughts drifted, scattered between memories of his home, the voices of his ancestors calling for him to rise. But he couldn't. Not this time. Then, through the whistling wind, he heard it. A hum. A mechanical purr, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle cutting through the ice. Varric's glazed eyes flickered open, his body too weak to react. The snowstorm parted for a moment, revealing the source. A metal beast, battered and rust-covered, rolling toward him on treads that crunched against the frozen earth. It was an old human craft, a repair hauler from centuries past, its frame patched together with whatever scrap its owner had scavenged. And then, from its cockpit, stepped a human. The man dismounted with a practiced motion, his heavy boots sinking slightly into the ice before he strode forward with confidence. Wrapped in a patched brown coat, a welding torch strapped to his side, and a pair of rusted goggles perched atop his head, he looked more like a wanderer than a warrior. Yet there was something in his stance, an unshakable energy, a stubbornness that defied the very landscape. "Damn," the human muttered, squinting at the scene. "Now that's a mess." He approached without hesitation, as if the frozen battlefield were nothing more than a junkyard, his eyes scanning the wreckage. His gaze finally landed on Varric, half buried in snow. "Shit, you're still alive." Varric's throat rumbled weakly. His pride roared at the indignity of being spoken to like a piece of discarded scrap, but his body refused to respond. The human knelt beside him, brushing snow off the Dragonborn's wounds with gloved hands. Scales cracked, temperature dropping, circulation slowing. "Yeah, you're not doing too hot, buddy." Varric mustered a growl, barely more than a whisper. "Leave me." The human snorted. "Oh, yeah, sure. Just leave a big, badass space dragon to die in a pile of ice and garbage. Great idea." There was something about the tone, not mocking, not cruel, but amused, as if the human found the whole situation frustratingly inconvenient rather than tragic. Then, without asking permission, the human grabbed a small scanner from his belt and ran it over Varric's chest. The device beeped, flickering with strange symbols, before the man muttered, "Internal bleeding, broken ribs," and, "Oh, that's bad. Your core temperature's way too low." Varric tried to shake him off, but it was pathetic. The human clicked his tongue. Yeah, you're all big and scary, but you're in no position to argue." The Dragonborn narrowed his eyes, rage flickering beneath the exhaustion. "Who are you?" The human grinned. "Name's Carter. Just a mechanic passing through." Mechanic. The word sounded so insignificant, so meaningless against the weight of a dying warrior's legacy. And yet, here this mechanic was, staring down death, with nothing but a wrench and a bad attitude. Carter stood, stretching his arms. "All right, big guy. You got two options. 1. Stay here, freeze, and die. 2. Let me fix you up, and you can be pissed at me later." Varric tried to snarl. I do not need a human's pity. Carter smirked. Good, 'cause I'm not giving it. I just hate leaving broken things lying around. With that, the mechanic turned, heading back toward his hauler. For a moment, Varric thought the human would actually leave him. But then he saw Carter haul a massive mechanical arm from the side of the vehicle, unfolding it with a whir of hydraulics. The machine clanked and groaned, gears spinning as the arm extended toward him. All right, let's get you out of there, Carter muttered. Varric felt the pressure on his wings shift as the hauler's mechanical grip took hold, carefully lifting the debris pinning him. The pain was unbearable, fresh agony flooding his body as blood rushed back into crushed tissue. He let out a deep, shuddering breath, his vision darkening for a moment. Stay with me, Scales, Carter called. Don't you dare black out on me. Varric's claws twitched in the snow. He had spent days waiting for death. And yet now, at the hands of this strange, infuriating human, something else stirred within him. Hope. And that terrified him more than anything else. The pain was unbearable. As Carter's machine arm hoisted the wreckage off Varric's broken body, the Dragonborn nearly lost consciousness again. His wings, crushed under the weight of war debris for days, screamed in agony as blood sluggishly returned to them. Every nerve, every fiber of his being told him to let go, to slip back into the darkness where there was no more suffering. But then there was Carter. Hey, stay with me, big guy. You pass out, and I'm going to have to do this the hard way. Varric's vision swam as he tried to focus on the human. Carter had set the hauler's mechanical claw to hold the debris in place while he moved quickly around the Dragonborn, pulling out tools, scanning wounds, and cursing under his breath. His movements were precise, too practiced for just a simple mechanic. Carter, Varric's voice was barely more than a whisper. Why? Carter didn't look up as he fumbled for something in his belt pouch. Why what? Why help me? The human shrugged, pulling out a small injector filled with a strange blue liquid. Because you're still alive, and that means there's something worth fixing. Varric let out a weak, rasping laugh. I am not a machine. Yeah, could have fooled me. You're half covered in metal plating, and your bones are tougher than a warship's hull. Carter clicked the injector, and a sharp sting shot through Varric's side as the substance entered his bloodstream. That should stabilize your core temperature. Won't fix everything, but it'll keep you from freezing to death in the next hour. Varric's muscles tensed at the unfamiliar sensation. Whatever Carter had given him was already working, a strange warmth spreading through his veins. His body was still broken, but the haze in his mind began to clear. Carter stood and wiped his hands on his coat. All right, I need to move you. Can you stand? Varric tried to flex his talons, but his limbs were still sluggish, unresponsive. The idea of moving was almost laughable. He let out a huff of breath, shaking his head. Carter sighed. Yeah, didn't think so. This is going to be a problem. The snowstorm had begun to die down, the howling winds giving way to an eerie silence. Carter paced, muttering calculations to himself. The hauler was sturdy, but it wasn't designed to carry a being as large as Varric. Dragging him was an option, but that risked worsening his injuries. Then, a crackling sound came from Carter's wrist communicator. Carter, you there? You better not be looting a battlefield again, you jackass. Carter rolled his eyes and tapped the device. Relax, Rayla. I'm not looting. I found someone. Static buzzed for a moment before a woman's voice returned, sharp and incredulous. Someone. Carter, that war was over weeks ago. There shouldn't be anyone left out there. Well, guess what? There is. Carter glanced at Varric. Big guy. Meet Rayla. She's my engineer. Rayla. Meet? Varric. The Dragonborn rumbled, his voice slightly stronger now. Right, Varric. He's in bad shape, but he's alive. Rayla's voice turned cautious. Carter, is this another one of your fixer-upper projects? Please tell me you didn't find a half-dead alien and decide to keep him. Listen, Carter said, exasperated. He needs help. I need to get him back to the ship. A pause. Then, how bad? Really bad. Broken ribs, torn wings, internal bleeding, hypothermia. The works. Rayla let out a string of curses. And let me guess, you're expecting me to patch him up? You're the best at what you do. That's not the point. Carter grinned. So that's a yes. Rayla groaned. You are so lucky I owe you one. Fine. Bring him back, but don't expect me to work miracles. Carter turned off the communicator and smirked. She's going to be thrilled to meet you. Varric narrowed his eyes. You're engineer. She's a healer. More like a miracle worker with machines and bodies. Carter stepped back toward his hauler. Now, let's get you out of this graveyard before something decides you're an easy meal. Carter had seen plenty of wrecked war zones, but this battlefield was eerily silent. No scavengers, no looters. Just endless ice and the skeletons of fallen war machines. The kind of place that fell haunted. Using the hauler's mechanical arms, Carter carefully hoisted Varric onto a reinforced sled, securing him with thick cables. The Dragonborn grunted in pain, but said nothing as the human worked. You all right back there? Carter called as he climbed into the hauler. Varric didn't answer. His golden eyes were fixed on the ruins, his expression unreadable. Carter frowned. Hey, you good? Varric's voice was low. This place was once my home. Carter felt something tighten in his chest. He glanced around at the broken remains of war mechs, shattered structures, and half-buried insignias. It wasn't just a battlefield. It was a graveyard of a lost civilization. Carter turned back to his controls. Then let's get you out of here. The hauler rumbled to life, its engines cutting through the cold as it began moving forward. The treads churned through the ice, kicking up snow as they departed the ruins. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wind had settled, leaving only the hum of the hauler's engine and the occasional creak of metal. Then, Varric broke the silence. You are not a soldier. Carter smirked. Nope. Just a mechanic. Then why are you here? Carter hesitated. Because someone has to pick up the pieces after the fighting stops. Varric studied him for a long moment before closing his eyes. A strange human indeed. Carter chuckled. Yeah, I get that a lot. But just as the tension began to ease, a warning light blinked on Carter's dashboard. He frowned. That's not good. Varric opened one eye. What is it? Carter checked his sensors. We're not alone. A second later, the communicator crackled again. This time, Rayla's voice was sharp and urgent. Carter, you need to move. Now. Carter's heart pounded. What's happening? Rayla's next words sent ice down his spine. You tripped a proximity alarm. Something's out there. Something big. Before Carter could react, a deep, inhuman roar echoed through the frozen wasteland. Something massive stirred in the distance. The ground trembled. And then, from the shadows of the ruined battlefield, something emerged. The ground trembled beneath the hauler's treads. Carter gripped the controls as the vehicle skidded over the icy terrain, trying to put distance between them and whatever had just emerged from the ruins. The sensors screamed warnings of a massive heat signature, but the thick snow and jagged metal remains obscured their pursuer. Then came the roar. It wasn't the cry of a mindless beast. It was something ancient, something furious. Varric's eyes snapped open, his body rigid despite his injuries. No, it cannot be. Carter shot him a quick glance. You know what that is? Varric's voice was a whisper, filled with something Carter hadn't heard in him before. Fear. It is the Sentinel. A deep, rumbling boom shook the frozen wasteland. Then another. The ground cracked as something enormous pushed through the wreckage, sending slabs of broken war machines flying like pebbles. And then Carter saw it. It was a mech. Or at least, it had once been a mech. Towering at nearly 20 meters, the construct was a fusion of broken war machines, its body an amalgamation of steel plating, shattered turrets, and ancient bones. Its shape was vaguely draconic, serpentine in the way its long, reinforced tail coiled behind it, jagged wings of shattered metal barely functioning on its back. But its head was unmistakably Dragonborn. A skeletal visage, its hollowed eye sockets burning with an eerie blue glow. And it was looking right at them. Carter cursed. That's the thing guarding this place. What the hell is it? Varric swallowed hard. The last defender of my people. The sentinel let out another roar, shaking the ice beneath them. Then, with terrifying speed, it charged. Carter slammed the throttle, sending the hauler into overdrive. The vehicle groaned as its engines fought against the frozen terrain, treads throwing up sheets of snow and debris. A massive, clawed hand, made of fused Dragonborn armor and wrecked exosuit plating, slammed into the ground just behind them, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. "We are going to die," Varric muttered. "Not if I can help it." Carter gritted his teeth. "Rayla, I need a route now." The communicator crackled. "That thing is too fast, Carter. You can't outrun it." "Not what I asked." Rayla's voice turned frantic as she scanned her surroundings from her end. Okay. There's a canyon half a click north. If you can make it, you might lose in the ice tunnels." Carter didn't hesitate. He jerked the hauler's controls, veering hard north. Varric grunted as the sudden turn jostled his broken body. "This machine of yours, can it withstand a direct hit?" Carter scoffed. "Oh, hell no." The sentinel roared again. Carter didn't have to look to know it was closing in. The jagged remains of the battlefield gave way to a steeper incline, the ground sloping downward toward the canyon Rayla had mentioned. If he could just get them over the ridge. Then a shadow fell over them. Carter barely had time to react before the sentinel leaped, its monstrous form crashing down ahead of them, sending a massive shockwave through the ground. The force sent the hauler spinning out of control. Carter's stomach lurched as the vehicle flipped, metal screeching, against the ice as it tumbled down the slope. Varric was thrown from the sled, hitting the ground hard. Carter barely had time to brace before the hauler slammed into the ice below, its frame groaning in protest. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Sparks flickered across the dashboard as systems failed one by one. Silence. Then Varric's voice. "Carter." Carter groaned, forcing his eyes open. He was upside down, still strapped into the pilot seat. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. Varric was alive, barely pushing himself up from the snow. But his gaze wasn't on Carter. It was on the sentinel, now standing at the edge of the ridge above them. Its glowing eyes burned with recognition. Then, in a voice that should not have been possible, the sentinel spoke. "Traitor." Varric stiffened. His golden eyes widened. The sentinel jumped, crashing down into the canyon. The ice shattered beneath its weight, sending shockwaves through the frozen ground. Varric struggled to his feet, shaking. "No, it remembers me." Carter finally unbuckled himself and dropped to the floor. "What the hell does it mean, traitor?" Varric's jaw clenched. "There is no time. It will not stop." The sentinel lunged. Carter yanked his pistol from its holster and fired. The plasma round struck the mech's armor, but did nothing. The construct barely flinched, its focus locked entirely on Varric. Carter's mind raced. The hauler was totaled. Varric was in no condition to fight. And even if he was, that thing was an unstoppable force. But Carter wasn't a soldier. He was a mechanic. And mechanics knew how to break things. His eyes darted across the battlefield, scanning the wreckage. His mind calculated variables, potential weaknesses, anything he could use. Then he saw it. Half buried in the ice, behind the sentinel was a power core. A massive, unstable fusion reactor, likely from one of the downed warships. Its outer casing was cracked, damaged but still humming with raw energy. Carter's brain went into overdrive. He turned to Varric. "Can you still breathe fire?" Varric blinked. "What? Your fire. Can you still use it? Even a little?" Varric hesitated. Perhaps." Carter grinned. "Then we might just have a shot." The sentinel raised a massive clawed hand. Carter ran, straight for the power core. The sentinel roared, shifting its attention from Varric to Carter. "Hey, ugly!" Carter yelled. "Come and get me!" The construct lunged after him. Varric stared in shock. "What are you doing?" "Buying time," Carter shouted, skidding to a stop near the power core. His hands flew across his belt, grabbing a pair of fusion cutters. When I say go, burn it. Varric's eyes flicked to the reactor. His breath caught. He understood. The Sentinel was nearly upon them. Carter worked fast, prying open the reactor's damaged plating, exposing its raw energy coils. Sparks flew as unstable plasma leaked into the frozen air. Now, Varric roared. With every ounce of strength left in his body, he summoned a deep, golden inferno and unleashed it. Flames engulfed the reactor. The unstable core overloaded. Carter dived behind a wrecked mech. And then, the explosion ripped through the canyon. A blinding pulse of energy consumed the Sentinel, fire and plasma tearing through its monstrous frame. The shockwave threw Varric backward. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the dust cleared, and the Sentinel stood there, burning, broken, but still alive. It turned its ruined skull toward them, and took a single, shaking step forward. Carter's blood ran cold. This thing was not done yet. The Sentinel lurched forward, its massive frame barely holding together. Its once imposing figure was now half melted, the explosion having fused parts of its body into grotesque, charred masses of metal and bone. The eerie blue glow in its eye sockets flickered, unstable, yet relentless. Carter gritted his teeth. Oh, come on. That should have killed it. Varric coughed, dragging himself upright. His once proud golden scales were burned and battered, but his grip on his broken arm had steadied. You do not understand, he rasped. The Sentinel is not alive in the way you think. Carter turned to him. Then what the hell is it? Varric's expression darkened. Is my people's last guardian, a construct of vengeance, given purpose through our fallen. The Sentinel growled, a hollow, mechanical sound. Then, its ruined maw opened, and a terrible, pulsing energy charge began to build in its core. Carter's eyes widened. That looks bad. Varric tensed. It is an annihilation pulse. It will kill us both. Carter didn't waste a second. He sprinted toward the wreckage of his hauler, wrenching open a compartment beneath its crushed hull. His hands flew across wires and switches, pulling out an emergency pulse grenade, the kind meant to disable rogue war machines. He turned to Varric. Tell me that thing still has some organic parts left. Varric's eyes locked onto the Sentinel's partially exposed ribcage, where blackened bones still clung to metal plating. Yes, but what are you? No time. Carter hurled the grenade straight at the Sentinel's core. The device latched on, its energy coils whirring as it sent a disruptive surge through the construct's body. Sparks erupted from its limbs as the ancient programming inside it glitched, stuttered, and then stopped. For one breathless second, the massive machine froze. Then its entire body seized. The annihilation pulse that had been charging faltered, flickering like a failing star. Varric's eyes widened. You disrupted its neural link. Carter didn't stop to celebrate. Great, but that's not going to last long. He was right. The Sentinel's massive frame shuddered, its blue glow flickering back to life. Its body strained against the neural disruption, ancient systems fighting to reboot. And it was winning. Varric cursed. It will override the interference in seconds. Carter's mind raced. He had one shot left. One final gamble. He turned to Varric. Can you still connect to it? Varric stiffened. What? You said this thing was a guardian of your people. That means it has Dragonborn code buried inside, right? Some kind of override. Varric's jaw clenched. Yes, but Carter grabbed him by the shoulder. Then use it. Varric hesitated. His entire body shook with exhaustion, pain, and something deeper, something Carter couldn't place. Fear. Carter softened his voice. Varric, this thing knows you. It called you traitor. If you don't face it now, we all die. The Sentinel roared, its paralysis breaking. The annihilation pulse began charging again. Varric closed his eyes. Then, with a deep, ragged breath, he stepped forward. His remaining clawed hand reached out toward the Sentinel. And then, In a voice heavy with grief, he spoke in his native tongue. Teravziria, nor Vakdarish. Varric Zanva. The sentinel jerked, its entire body locking up. Carter barely dared to breathe. The construct twitched, its head jerking to the side as if it were struggling against something unseen. Its once glowing eye sockets dimmed, pulsing weakly. Then it spoke. Varric. Carter's skin crawled. That voice, it was not synthetic. It was something older, something collective, as if the souls of the Dragonborn dead still whispered from within the machine. Varric's face twisted with pain. Yes, it is I. The sentinel shook, its voice shifting between a deep growl and a warbling distortion. You do not belong. Varric took another step forward. I was the last to leave. His voice cracked. I ran. I failed you. The sentinel trembled. Its body began to split apart, ancient mechanisms breaking under the force of conflicting programming. Then, a new voice emerged from within. A voice Varric knew. Brother. Varric's breath caught. His claws shook. No. Carter tensed. Varric, what is it? Varric's eyes burned. My brother. He was... His voice cracked. He was the one who activated the sentinel. And suddenly, Carter understood. This was not just a mindless war machine. It was a graveyard. And the soul at its core was someone Varric loved. The sentinel's movements faltered. The glow in its eyes dimmed. The voice, broken, raw, but real, spoke again. You left us. Varric dropped to his knees. I know. Carter's gut twisted. He had seen many things in his time as a mechanic. Broken machines, ruined starships, lost technology. But this was a broken heart, trapped inside a war machine. The sentinel's core pulse began to destabilize. The construct was collapsing, its purpose unraveling. Varric reached out, pressing his palm against the sentinel's burning metal chest. Let go, he whispered. You have suffered long enough. For a moment, nothing. Then, the sentinel let out a long, final exhale. Its massive frame collapsed, falling to its knees. The glow in its eyes faded. The energy inside it burned away into the frozen air. And then, like an old warrior finally laying down its blade, it stopped. The canyon fell into silence. Carter barely realized he had been holding his breath. He slowly stood, watching as the monstrous construct, once an unstoppable force of destruction, became still. Varric did not move. He only knelt before the fallen machine, his head bowed, his breath shaking. Carter swallowed the lump in his throat. And then, softly he murmured, It's over. Varric's voice was barely a whisper. No, it has only begun. The sentinel's massive, broken frame still radiated heat as its core dimmed into silence. The battle was over. The beast that had threatened to destroy them both lay in ruin, and yet an unbearable weight remained in the frozen air. Carter let out a slow breath, watching the vapor swirl in the cold. His muscles ached, and his body protested every movement as he stood. Varric still knelt before the fallen construct, his clawed hand resting against the lifeless metal chest. He wasn't speaking, not in words Carter could hear, but something about the way he bowed his head told Carter this was more than just a victory. This was a funeral. Carter shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't good with moments like this. He had spent his life fixing machines, not people. Still, he wasn't heartless. He took a step forward. Varric. The Dragonborn exhaled. Slowly, he stood, but his golden eyes never left the fallen sentinel. I knew he was lost, Varric said at last, voice heavy with guilt. But I never thought I would hear his voice again. Carter hesitated. You knew him well. Varric's expression darkened. He was my brother. Carter sucked in a breath. Damn. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The howling winds had died down, leaving only the eerie stillness of the canyon. Then, Varric's claws clenched into fists. I was meant to die with them, he admitted, his voice raw. But I ran. I fled the war, abandoned my people, and my brother was left to activate the sentinel. His breath hitched. He was the last one standing. Carter frowned. He became the machine. Varric nodded. Or at least, a part of him did. The sentinel was designed to house the fallen, to keep their vengeance alive. His eyes flickered with grief. But they were never meant to linger for this long. My brother's soul should have passed on centuries ago. Carter exhaled. Then maybe this was the best thing we could have done. Varric's shoulders tensed. Was it? Carter gave him a sideways look. He was trapped in that thing, Varric. He wasn't living. He was stuck. And you helped set him free. The Dragonborn didn't respond immediately. He only let his claws drift over the sentinel's ruined plating, his eyes distant. Then, finally, he nodded. Perhaps you are right, human. Carter gave him a small, tired smirk. I usually am. Varric huffed, shaking his head. The tension in his body eased, just slightly, but Carter could tell there was a new weight settling on him. A weight that wouldn't be lifted so easily. He sighed. So what now? Varric didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the frozen canyon stretched into endless white. I do not know, he admitted. For the first time in centuries. I truly do not know. Carter understood that feeling all too well. He had spent most of his life drifting from one broken machine to the next, fixing things because that's what he knew how to do. But standing here, next to a Dragonborn warrior with a shattered past, in the ruins of an ancient battlefield, he realized something. This wasn't just about fixing things. It was about moving forward. Carter stretched his sore arms, rolling his stiff shoulders. Well, he said, if you need something to do, I could always use an extra pair of hands. Varric blinked at him. You are offering me work. Carter shrugged. Why not? You look like a guy who could use a fresh start. Varric scoffed. I am a warrior, not a mechanic. Carter grinned. And I'm a mechanic, not a warrior. Looks like we balance each other out. Varric stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, his lips curled into something resembling a smile. Perhaps, he murmured, you are not as foolish as I thought, human. Carter chuckled. High praise, coming from you? A distant rumble interrupted their conversation. Carter's head snapped up, scanning the horizon. The canyon walls trembled. The ice cracked. And then, like a great, slumbering giant awakening, the ruins beneath them shifted. Carter stiffened. Varric. The Dragonborn narrowed his eyes. I see it. The sentinel's collapse had disturbed something deep below. Beneath the layers of ice and wreckage, a massive structure was stirring, something older than the war that had destroyed this place. Carter's stomach dropped. That doesn't look good. Varric tensed. No, it does not. And then, the ground beneath them gave way. Carter barely had time to curse before the ground beneath him collapsed completely. The ice gave way in a deafening roar, swallowing both him and Varric into the abyss below. Fragments of the ruined sentinel tumbled with them, twisting in the dim, shifting light. For a brief, terrifying moment, Carter was weightless, falling through darkness. Then, impact. A harsh, metallic clang rang through the void as Carter landed hard on his back. The breath was knocked from his lungs, his entire body protesting the sudden stop. Somewhere nearby, Varric groaned. Carter coughed, forcing himself onto his elbows. His vision swam. His head throbbed. But he was alive. And, somehow, that was the least of his concerns. Because beneath them, stretching into the endless dark, lay something impossible. A city. Not ruins. Not broken structures swallowed by time. A city intact. Carter's breath hitched. Massive spires of obsidian metal loomed over them, pulsing with a faint, golden glow. The architecture was unlike anything he had ever seen. Organic, yet artificial, as if the structures had grown rather than been built. Strange symbols lined the streets, humming faintly beneath layers of frost. The place was alive. Carter felt a shiver crawl up his spine. This, Varric exhaled, pushing himself to his feet. His voice was hushed, almost reverent. This should not exist. Carter swallowed hard. Yeah, well, it does. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the impossible vastness of the underground city. It stretched in every direction, disappearing into shadow. The air was thick, heavy with something ancient, something watching. Then, far off in the distance, movement. A flicker of light. Carter's heart pounded. We're not alone. Varric tensed. His claws flexed at his sides, golden eyes narrowing. No, we are not. A deep hum resonated through the ground. A pulse. Like a machine waking up from a long, restless sleep. Carter exchanged a wary glance with Varric. Well, he muttered. Guess we found out what the sentinel was guarding. Varric's expression darkened. Or what was keeping buried? A low, mechanical whisper drifted through the city. Not speech, not quite. More like the echo of something remembering how to speak. And then, the lights flickered on. Golden veins of energy surged through the streets, tracing ancient circuits. The walls hummed with power, long dormant systems reawakening. Carter barely had time to process what was happening before the first figure emerged from the shadows. It was not organic. A construct, tall, humanoid, forged of sleek black metal. Its face was smooth, expressionless, save for two piercing white eyes that locked onto them with unsettling focus. Then another appeared, and another. Dozens of them, stepping from the dark, their movements eerily synchronized. Carter took a step back. Varric. The Dragonborn's claws tightened. His muscles tensed. I see them, he murmured. A pause. Then, the lead construct tilted its head, its voice a soft mechanical whisper. Designation detected. Unauthorized. State your purpose. Carter exhaled slowly. His mind raced. They weren't dead yet. That was something. He cleared his throat, raising his hands carefully. Just passing through. Silence. Then, the construct's glowing eyes flickered. Organic presence. Anomalous. Carter grimaced. That doesn't sound good. Varric took a cautious step forward, his voice low but firm. We are not your enemies. The constructs did not react. Then, without warning, one stepped forward, faster than Carter could blink. A sharp, clawed hand lashed out toward him. But before it could strike, Varric moved. A blur of gold scales and flashing steel. The Dragonborn's blade met the construct's wrist mid-swing, sending a shower of sparks into the air. A beat. Then, all at once, the constructs reacted. The city came alive. The hum of machines became a roar, energy crackling through the air. The constructs advanced in perfect synchronization, their eyes burning white-hot. Carter's stomach dropped. Oh, hell. Varric growled, tightening his stance. Carter clenched his fists. His body screamed in protest, but adrenaline kicked in. They had to move. Fast. Because whatever they had just awakened, it wasn't going to let them leave. Carter didn't know how long they ran. Through twisting corridors, dodging between ancient machines, their breath ragged in the cold air. The constructs pursued with tireless efficiency, their movements unnervingly fluid, voices whispering in code. They had nearly made it to the city's outer edge, when the doors opened. Not behind them, in front of them, and something stepped out. Not a construct, not a machine, something else. Tall, draconic, but not like Varric. Its eyes gleamed with something deeper, ancient intelligence, burning with recognition. It saw Varric, and smiled. At last, Varric froze. His breath hitched. His claws trembled. Carter saw something in his expression. Something rare. Fear. A slow, deliberate step. The figure's gaze did not waver. The bloodline endures. A pause. Then, it extended its clawed hand, not as an enemy, but as a summons. Come, child of the lost. Your destiny awaits. Varric didn't move, didn't speak. Carter felt his own pulse hammering in his skull. Then, very, very softly, Varric exhaled and took a step forward. Carter barely processed what he was doing before his hand shot out, grabbing Varric's arm. Whoa. Hold up. Varric, what the hell? Varric turned, his golden eyes unreadable. This, he murmured, voice hoarse, is what I was meant for. Carter's chest tightened. The city hummed around them. The constructs watched in eerie silence. The figure waited. Carter clenched his jaw. And then, slowly, he let go. Varric stepped forward. The doors closed behind him. Silence. Carter let out a breath. And then, alone, in the ruins of Lost City, he turned and walked away.